I don't think the significance of this can be overstated. And as you know, Mayor Henry, NIPRA, Northeast Indiana Passenger Rail Association, Pam Holocher, a number of folks in the city have been working for a long, long time to try to build a coalition. I've been working on this since 1999 when we were talking about when Paul Helmke was mayor, how we might bring passenger rail back to Fort Wayne. And so it's a long-standing effort, and we're not there yet, but this was a significant step forward. And all of these months, really years that we've been trying to build this coalition, it's among 3 states, Illinois, Indiana, and Ohio, finally comes to fruition, not only with the signing of a memorandum of agreement that says we're all going to work for this, we're all going to fight for this, but we're all going to put some money in. And, this is significant. Thanks to Pam and Mayor Henry and many others, I think on the Indiana side, and NIPRA's been involved in this, we see probably 50% or more of the funds that we had pledged coming forward. We think now with this memorandum of agreement being signed, that shows that we're serious, that we mean business, that 3 states are getting together, that we'll raise that additional money very soon. And then we can begin the process of taking this to the next step forward, which is a Tier 1 environmental impact study. We've done a business plan. At the request of former Governor Mitch Daniels, we hired a consultant. Mayor Henry put money in, NIPRA raised money, New Haven put some money in. We had a lot of private sector folks in Ohio. And the business plan was very promising. It said, as the release I think you have states, that this could not only be a big improvement for transportation, but it could eventually be a moneymaker and add a lot of jobs to the region. So that kind of prompted, I think, Governor Pence and others to say, Fort Wayne, NIPRA, others, take that next step. Let's see if we can raise the funds. You guys have to do this on your own. That's the way it is now with austere budgets, but if you can raise the money, let's go that next step with the Tier 1 environmental impact. So, like I say, the significance, I'm elated. The significance of this cannot be overstated, and the fact that we've gotten this far with the cooperation of all these cities, I think is a very strong indication that this project could go forward. But the next step is environmental impact, exactly what it says it is, and it's going to take probably a year or more to do once those funds are totally raised.
Mm-hmm. And I know with and correct me if I'm wrong, this study will help determine which route would have the least amount of impact on the environment, be the best route possible between Columbus and Chicago.
Well, I think that what we hope is that we've pretty much selected that route. That this feasibility study says that if we have a route from Chicago to Columbus through Fort Wayne, and serving these, 8 other cities from Chicago to Columbus, we're going to see an economic impact of substantial proportions. We're going to see 26,000 jobs created over 30 years. We're going to see incomes appreciatively go up, and we're going to see a lot of economic activity, a lot of jobs and economic activity. Plus, we're going to see a system that will, surprisingly enough, break even after the first couple of years of operation and perhaps make a profit in the future. So I think this is the route that's been selected. Now it's kind of, how will this affect the cities of Fort Wayne, Plymouth, Warsaw, Valparaiso, etc.? What kinds of things would it affect as far as the environment is concerned, which is something we do probably whether we build a highway or build a building or anything else. So this is a step in that right direction. But I think the route that we're pretty much sold on is the one that's going to be from Chicago to Columbus. And I think what's significant there also is that this is kind of another one of the spokes out of the wheel. Chicago being the hub. We see Chicago to Detroit under construction, Chicago to St. Louis. There are plans, at least on paper, for Chicago to Minneapolis, perhaps Chicago to Des Moines, the Quad Cities. So if you look at a map, the next logical direction is Chicago to Columbus, and the proximity for us is to our advantage. We're right in the middle, about 150 miles from each city. So this is the preferred route. This is the one that will be profitable. This is the one that will connect millions of people through passenger rail. This is one that will help the city of Fort Wayne continue to grow and our downtown to continue to grow. And this is the one that we want to now take a closer look at, find out what steps need to be taken, and then see if we can get to a phase where we could actually start designing.
Mm-hmm. I know talking with the Mayor of Gary today, she was telling me that she hopes that this passenger rail will go right by the lake and
Right.
the airport.
Mhm.
And they have a microbrewery that just recently opened up.
Mhm.
They've gotten a lot of traffic from Chicago, people going into Gary. Is the goal to get the rail near the airports, including FWA, so that people can seamlessly?
Yes.
Go ahead.
It's a full modal system, so we hook up with either airports or other, like bus stations and that sort of thing. That's why the Baker Street station is an ideal location, because CityLink is just adjacent to that. But I'd also just like to note why the city feels that this is such a significant step, and that is our mayor, Tom Henry, has taken a leadership role with this. So, because he knew Fort Wayne really stood to gain from an economic development standpoint, and really helping to put us on the map, because we are one of the few larger communities in this nation that don't have passenger rail. So he worked very hard, along with NIPRA and City Council, to get the other mayors to agree. And that wasn't a small feat, because we had to work with other city councils, we had to work with other stakeholders, the other mayors. The mayors felt that they had to go to their city councils, to their county councils. We had to work with multiple states, at the state level, at the federal level. So were many tiers to this to get everyone to agree to do the same thing and to agree to an agreement. I don't know how many amendments and changes there have been back and forth, but this was a very big deal to the mayors in both Indiana and Ohio.
And what kind of impact, I know you were talking a lot about what kind of economic impact, I mean, is this something that you think could really take, and both of you, take Fort Wayne to another level, to really just keep the momentum of the city going, and I guess how do you see
Sure.
this?
Yeah.
Well, definitely, and we just got and read the Indiana's and the governor's Blue Ribbon report, and what that really showed is people are driving their automobiles less. Fewer people are driving, and why? Because they're depending more on other types of transportation. They're depending more on buses, they're biking, and they're using trains and flying. And so I think it is it's very significant that we look to the future and realize that people are going to be wanting to use other types of transportation, especially the younger generation. We hear that more people are interested in the younger folks using their phones and really investing in a car, and they're really looking toward other types of transportation. So I think it's very, very important that we plan to do that.
If I might just add to that, you look at the progress that the city has made in the last few years. I'll throw Headwaters Park in there. I think they've done a pretty good job on the north end of the downtown. Certainly the Grand Wayne Center expansion, the library, and then came along Parkview Field. Parkview Field is about, what, a block and a half away from the Baker Street station. It's 2 blocks or 3 blocks now from what will be the Ash and Hanning and Bean project. I mean, look at the significant projects that are already going on that this adds to, and it makes Fort Wayne more of an attraction, more of a place where people want to live and people want to work. People want to live and work here, the jobs follow, and I think we're going to see our airport. We just worked to try to beef that up a little bit and add another airline service here, thanks to the mayor and the airport authority just in the last few months. We've got a pretty good transportation system and I-69 and so on. We need rail as the third leg, if you will, and something, as Pam says, that will draw and continue to keep a lot of young folks in the community. You know, I represent a district that includes all of downtown Fort Wayne and some neighborhoods that I think would benefit substantially with a railroad service within a few blocks away. Those are places where people are going to want to live. You might think, well, you'd want to live far away from that. Not anymore. I think now trains are pretty quiet anyway. We have trains going through, freight trains, the city all the time, all hours of the day and night. But folks are going to want to live in neighborhoods where they can walk to a train station or take a cab or easily drive, and that's going to help a lot of these emerging neighborhoods tremendously. But job creation, this will perhaps spur another development downtown, and one helps the other. And the significant thing about this is, if this plan is successful, we're talking about like 10 trains running in each direction each day. That's a substantial amount of service through this city, and moves a lot of people and will help tourism a lot as well.
And when we're talking about passenger rail, I guess how fast would this move? 70 miles per hour, or how fast would this?
Up to 110 miles per hour. And part of the reason for that is the economics. Once you go over 110 miles an hour, the cost of the project increases greatly. And also because we're working with CSX, because we think that the owner of the system that will be utilizing for passenger rail will work with us if our speeds are less than 110.
Okay. And are we talking like railroad tracks, or is this like elevated raised rails that you see?
We're really looking at the existing tracks. We won't really have to do elevated tracks unless we would supersede or go faster than the 110, and that's another reason why we're keeping it at 110 or less.
Okay.
And keep in mind, Megan, that's a maximum, 110 out on the straightaway in the rural areas, much slower as you come into town, just like if you were driving on an interstate highway and you stopped. But so the average speed is much less than that. Just like if you were driving I-69, you're not going to average 70 miles per hour because you've got to slow down, you got to get off. But thinking about the average speeds, it's projected that even with all of these stops, that you could get to Chicago in 2 hours is significant. I mean, that will draw a lot of passengers. Because right now, you've got to go to Waterloo. We don't want to take anything away from that. Apparently, they're going to upgrade their station, and that's fine. This is separate service. Amtrak has told us for many years that they felt Fort Wayne was underserved, and we feel that service here is important. Speeds of that nature will draw more passengers. That's why we think this could eventually project a surplus. And folks can get to Chicago. Folks from Chicago can get to Fort Wayne. Folks from other cities can get in. So this is a tourist draw for us as well. But because of those speeds, we think we can draw a lot of interest.
And it's why we call it higher speed and not high speed. We're not really looking to the 220, at least at this point, maybe in the future sometime. But right now, we're really looking at higher speed rail.
Okay.
Would there be concerns of siphoning off passengers from flying out of FWA in that instance? If it was that easy to get to Chicago, why not just go to Chicago via rail and fly out of Chicago? Was that a concern?
Well, we spent some time with the airport authority, and I spent a lot of time with Scott Hinderman on this particular subject. They feel that the folks that they lose to Chicago will probably either drive. This really won't have much of an effect on it. If anything, we might see more of an interest in marketing our airport. As Pam mentioned, if we have trains coming in and making these stops at Warsaw, at Lima, keep in mind, folks could get on a train, come to Baker Street Station, get on a bus and go to our airport.
Fly out of our
and
airport.
fly out of our airport instead. That might be an incentive for us to work on a package of how we might attract that. And since we just got another airline starting here, in October, I think, or not a new airline, but new stops. And Delta's announced an additional flight, I think, coming this fall. This is a good opportunity, I think, to add service rather than take away.
What sort of timeline are we looking at? When would the study begin?
Do you want to answer that, Pam, or I can if you want?
Well, sure. Well, we hope by the end of the year, because we still have to do some fundraising and we have to write the RFP. So we're hoping the study will begin by the end of the year, and then it will take about 18 months to complete. And then we would go into the tier 2, where we would really actually work on the engineering.
So there's another study after this one?
Well, it's not really a study so much. I mean, right now we're in the public engagement, choosing the right route, looking at the environmental impacts, and then we move into actually the engineering and right-of-way development and that sort of thing.
What do you think when would we be seeing this come to fruition in Fort Wayne?
Well, if everything worked like clockwork, and usually things don't, I mean, we could start construction within the next 5 years. But most of this is going to happen incrementally too, like everything usually does. And also there will be multiple funding sources. The days that the FRA just paid for everything, or we had to have a 20% local match and it was done, those days are really gone. So we'll be looking at things incrementally and from different funding sources also.
How much money has to be raised entirely for this project to be done, start to finish, for all the cities and?
The study or the entire
I guess the
project? You
entire
mean for it to be
project.
built? Probably around $1 billion,
Yeah.
1.2 billion. And that's between the two states and the federal government and state and private sector.
Keep in mind what would be coming forward, and that is, as Pam said, and one of the advantages here is that we're working closely with CSX, which is the freight line that owns the right-of-way on a lot of these freight rails to tracks from and through Indiana and Ohio, that we might be able to kind of piggyback on that if we don't want to get in their way, we don't want freight service to get in our way, but that means building some additional passing track. That might mean putting in some overpasses. That might mean new signalization. All those things are costly. But consider the price of adding rail. The price of an interstate highway now, the I-69 extension from Indianapolis to Evansville, is about $20 million per mile. This project is around 3 to 4. So significant, but less significant when you look at the price of building a highway, and of course
Or a bridge.
or a bridge.
Mhm.
Bridges are very expensive as well. I believe the Cincinnati Bridge, the new I-71, I want to say, bridge over the Ohio River in Cincinnati is more than the cost of this entire project. Now think about
Right.
that. This is an interstate highway bridge over the Ohio River. We all know that's a pretty big river, right? But the price of that bridge is more expensive than the cost of this whole project between Chicago and Columbus. So when you put these things in perspective, yes, it's a lot of
Which
money.
is-
People gasp a little bit. Where will that come from? Of course, it's our hope that up to 80%, it could be a little bit less than that, but we hope still up to 80% from the Federal Railroad Administration, 20% from state, perhaps local governments, similar to the highway plan. When Eisenhower came forward with the interstate highway plan 60 years ago, it was an 80-20 split. We think this might be something similar, and that's kind of what's going on elsewhere across the country.
The company that is taking over rail passenger service between Indy and Chicago,
Mhm.
Have you heard anything from them, any interest expressed in this project?
Not yet, because, you know, the facts aren't really, everything hasn't been figured out yet as to, you know, what we'll be doing.
My sense with this, if you like my 2 cents worth on it, is that when you have a feasibility study, a business plan that, as I mentioned, Governor Daniels had asked us to put forward, and we did. We raised over $100,000 in Indiana and Ohio. And when you have a feasibility study that points to a system that can break even after a few years of operation and can post a profit a few years down the road, there may be a lot of people who would be interested in participating in such an operation, perhaps even the construction. Those are issues to deal with down the road. But this is kind of different from what we've seen in other projects around the country. A little bit similar to what we're seeing with Chicago-Detroit, Chicago-St. Louis, but not quite the same as the Hoosier State Line, I think, from Indianapolis to Chicago. This is something new and a little bit different.
The environmental impact studies that have to be done, is
Mhm.
this something unique to railroading, or is it?
Oh, no, with
Yeah.
most every federal project, any transportation project, there has to be an environmental.
Yeah. You know, particularly with the possibility of adding tracks, as I mentioned, overpasses, how does that affect certain communities? How would that affect some rural areas? What would speeds up to 110 miles per hour do to perhaps the cows in the farmer's pasture? I don't know. I mean, all those things, I don't want to be flippant about it, but all those things have to be looked at. You know, it's, as they say, it's exactly what it says. It's an environmental impact. What will 20 trains coming in and out of Fort Wayne actually do? How will we handle that? You know, we don't think about that, but we probably have over 50 freight trains coming through Fort Wayne at all hours of the day and night. Obviously, to accommodate passenger trains, we've got to have some separate track, overpasses, and so on, and we might have to do some work in that area, some landscaping, the station work, things like that. And that's where we kind of come up to that $3.7 million or so per mile when you add all of those things in. And as Pam said, it's a little over $1 billion from probably the Illinois state line to Port Columbus International Airport, given the fact that Illinois and the city of Chicago have invested a lot in, once you get to the Illinois state line, they've invested a lot in passenger service to get you up to Union Station or Millennial Station.
Geoff, I just wanted you to
Yes.
clarify your
Yes.
role. You're really representing NIPRA right now instead of Councilman, or which would you prefer?
Well,
Both?
you know, I guess it's your call. To be honest with you, I have been a volunteer board member of NIPRA for several years. I've been on city council for a little over 2.5, and as you may know, I brought down the ordinance last year, actually last fall, but we didn't pass it till February or March. I sponsored the ordinance where we asked Fort Wayne to put in $200,000 to help fund this. That was an initial ask, if you recall, from legacy money, and some of my colleagues frowned on that. So we went back to the drawing board, and Mayor Henry and I and the city controller and Pam and others, and we found some additional funds through existing city money, not legacy money, that we were able to get council to agree. I believe the vote was last February, and it was a unanimous vote, 9-0, so I was very pleased with that. Shortly after that, the county commissioners came forward with $50,000. I don't want to slight anybody, but there's a whole laundry list. New Haven brought in some funds. We've had some local companies here, utilities, Steel Dynamics, others that have contributed. And then, of course, Warsaw, Warsaw, Plymouth, Valparaiso, et cetera, are coming forward. So that's how we kind of got this log rolling, if you will. I think with the initial ordinance that I sponsored, that we passed, kind of helped, I think, grease the rails, if you will, to get this moving, and now other folks are following suit. And again, we're delighted with what's happening in Ohio. They were a little bit behind our efforts, but they're catching up, and that shows strong support from the mayor of Columbus, which is very key in this, and other cities along the way. So again, this is a very, very significant step forward.
And with you saying that, when I spoke with the mayor of Gary, she said this should go to show, I mean, we're working across party lines.
That's
right?
right.
Right, exactly, it's
Absolutely.
bipartisan.
So, should this speak volumes
Yes.
to people here in Fort Wayne and elsewhere that this can be done?
Right.
Things can get
we-
done.
Everyone can work together.
Mayor Henry.
That's the point that Geoff is also representing a lot of volunteers as well. So
Yeah.
you've got government,
Mhm.
us, and city council, but then a massive amount of volunteers behind that effort too.
There are. There's a strong grassroots effort for this. We haven't done this for a while, and maybe it's about time we do, but we had a couple of rallies, 2009, 10, and a couple of events through the years that brought out over 1,000 people each time. And I think that resonated very strongly with our governors. First it was Mitch Daniels, now it's Mike Pence, our legislative delegation, and certainly our mayor, although he didn't need to be, I think, influenced that way, because he's been a strong supporter of this from the very beginning. I think it was partly the reason we got that 9-0 vote last February was because Mayor Henry was behind this and helping us as well. But it does show strong bipartisanship. It does show that we can return to that. I look forward to it. I know we've had some bumps along the road there, but this is one thing that we can do. We look forward to Governor Pence still keeping an eye on this, but encouraging us to go forward with the environmental impact study.